You're watching PM Agenda, as we've been discussing this afternoon. Better than expected economic growth figures. Still not fantastic, but coming in at 0.9% for the first 3 months of the year. 2.3% growth annually. Still a way to go to get back to the long-term average, but nonetheless, the government happy that these weren't worse than expected figures. With me now, the Assistant Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Very good afternoon to you.
Nice to be with you, David.
So the figure's better than expected. What do you put it down to?
Well, there was particularly strong growth in the export of services. Services are 70% of the Australian economy, but only 17% of our exports. There was an 8% jump in the export of services in this in these national accounts numbers. In terms of consumer spending too, David, there was strong support there, and I think people are finding with lower interest rates there's more money in their pockets. The lower Australian dollar is definitely helping the exports because export volumes have also been up after heavy investment, particularly in the mining space.
2.3% annually, though, is that enough to actually bring down unemployment?
Oh yeah, that's a strong number. It's 0.9% up for this March quarter. It's consistent with our budget forecast. Look, anecdotally, if you take the evidence from the budget announcements around small business, for example, that's really going to be a stimulus to 96% of all Australian businesses who are going to benefit from this accelerated depreciation.
Because business investment clearly needs a shot in the arm, doesn't it? It was down 3.5% in the quarter.
Yeah, CapEx was disappointing, particularly in the mining space. But we believe, particularly after the budget and the shot in the arm that gave businesses around the country, that you'll see CapEx and investment more generally start to rise.
So how much credit can the government take when economic growth picks up like this?
Well, we take the blame when things don't go well, and we should also take the credit when things do go better. We're trying to steer the economy in a very careful and considered path right now. I mean, the Reserve Bank has sent a very strong message by reducing interest rates. So monetary policy is trying to deal with the excess capacity in the economy. And then fiscal policy has to be careful to continue with the path of budget repair, but not rip too much money out of the economy, David, which could actually hurt employment and jobs.
The Reserve Bank is concerned about the housing market in Sydney in particular. I want to ask you about that and the comments by the Treasury Secretary, no less, that there's a housing bubble in Sydney and parts of Melbourne. Do you agree?
Look, there's definitely a hot housing market in Sydney. It's in parts of Melbourne. In other parts of the country, it's not so pronounced.
So why don't you use the word bubble? What's your thinking on that?
Well, I think, bubble will is essentially creating a lot of speculation, saying there's a lot of speculation going on and that it's about to burst. And we hope and don't believe it's about to burst, so to speak.
So it's not a bubble?
Well, we think there's been a steady increase. We're watching it, APRA's watching it, the Reserve Bank is watching it. But as Tony Abbott has said to the Parliament very clearly, when people's house prices rise, that's better for them. But the key point here is, what are we trying to do about it? We're trying to encourage investment in residential dwellings, and they're up 198,000 new dwellings over the last 12 months. We've strengthened the integrity of the residential housing market, particularly as it applies to foreign investment in that space. And then the Labor State Treasurer in Victoria, Tim Pallas, is leading a task force of state treasurers, state and territory treasurers, to look at how they can lift housing supply. So a lot of things are happening.
Labor is looking at negative gearing and capital gains tax rules. They haven't announced a policy. Well, what's your thinking on this? Should there be some limit around how many properties you can negatively gear?
Look, this is an issue that's been raised, obviously, in the tax white paper, but it's a double-edged sword, negative gearing, because, as you know, by providing those tax incentives for people to invest in the housing market, it means you're actually boosting supply of potential rental properties. And so, therefore, if you were to remove negative gearing, that could lead
should there be a limit, though? I mean, is 4 or 5 properties reasonable?
We're not about to speculate on putting limits such as those. These are issues that are being canvassed in the tax discussion.
And is the government going to consider the outcome of that?
Oh, look, we'll consider all the options in the tax discussion paper, but we have no plans to change negative gearing.
Superannuation, too. The Prime Minister's been saying we have no plans to change anything on superannuation.
And he's right.
But, I mean, you said today the government will consider good ideas put forward as part of the tax white paper process, and any changes recommended will be taken to the Australian people at the next election. So are you prepared to take any superannuation changes to the next election?
Well, we have no plans to make any changes to the taxation of super, and let me explain that. In the lead up to the last election, we made a commitment that we would make no adverse or unexpected changes to superannuation, because we understand people were rejecting that instability and uncertainty in the rules around superannuation that happened under the Rudd and Gillard governments. They made 12 adverse changes, $9 billion worth of additional taxes, and then Chris Bowen, who was the then Treasurer, rushed out a press release and said, I'm not going to make any changes for 5 years.
Sure, but if you need certainty, the logic of that would mean you don't have an inquiry. What's the point of this tax inquiry?
The tax discussion paper is about starting a discussion. It's getting all the facts on the table, allowing people to make submissions, and that's a vitally important process.
Sure, but to what end?
But we haven't seen the case for making any changes to the taxation on super. And it's
But why are you having this tax discussion paper process?
There's lots of things in that tax discussion paper. You mentioned negative gearing and capital gains. There's company tax. I mean, David, in Australia we have a tax system that resembles what it was in the 1950s. We have 800,000 companies in Australia, with just 12 companies providing 1/3 of total company tax receipts. These are the sort of issues.
I'm just trying to understand the thinking here. We need to have a tax discussion paper inquiry about negative gearing and superannuation.
And the GST's in there as well.
But you're definitely not changing any of those things.
Well, we have no plans to, and that's because we took a commitment to the last election, which we're absolutely sticking to.
So what's the point of having the inquiry?
If you get all the facts on the table, David, you can have a proper discussion, and people need to have their opportunity to be heard.
What's the point of a discussion?
Because all this information is extremely important for government to consider its options, but we have no plans.
Is the government open to considering options?
We have no plans to increase the tax on super, because...
I just want to be clear.
I'm very clear. Can I be clearer?
No, because are you considering options or not?
No, look, the tax discussion paper, as I said today, is on a range of issues. Let those discussions and those submissions be taken. If the government wants to take any options around any tax reform, we will do so to the Australian people to get a mandate.
But you're already ruling that out.
But there's a clear distinction between us and the Labor Party here. They were the party of higher taxes. Now in opposition, they're proposing 2 new taxes, both on the contribution stage.
I get the political point.
Well, it's not a political point.
I'm just wondering about...
For 400,000 plus Australians, they're going to get higher taxes on their super.
No question.
And we're not going to do that.
But I'm just asking about the government's position here.
No plans to increase.
No plans. So what's the point of the inquiry?
To get all the facts on the table.
So that you would then consider them or not?
Well, to allow people their chance heard. We'll consider all the options that are put forward in the tax discussion paper, and if we decide to take anything forward to the Australian people, we'll seek a mandate. We won't be like the Labor Party.
You might take something forward.
We've got no plans to, and it's pretty clear on that. But unlike the Labor Party and Chris Bowen, who put out his press release and said, in 5 years, we'll think about another changes to super, just a couple of years later, they're putting forward new taxes on super.
As I'm sure you know, Tony Shepherd in the Commission of Audit that the government commissioned, David Murray in the Financial Services Inquiry that the government ordered, and even the Treasury Secretary John Fraser once again have all said we've got to look at retirement income, superannuation and the pension together. I mean, are they right or wrong?
Well, this is a very complex area of superannuation tax and, of course, the pensions. And what we've said around the pension is that that is part of the safety net and needs to be provided to people who do need our support. That's why you'll see 170,000 people get on average a $30 increase per fortnight in their pension as a result of our changes. In relation to superannuation, we believe that that's people's hard-earned savings, David, and that's money that shouldn't be touched and it shouldn't have the instability and uncertainty that Labor is doing. So it's quite a contrast.
On the pension changes, yes, some will benefit, some will lose, though, as well. And I just want to be clear about this because under your budget plans, a retiree with $800,000 in assets would lose $13,500 annually. Now, the suggestion in the budget is that they draw down on their balance a further 1.7% a year. 1.85% a year from their super balance. Over 10 years, that would be, what, about 20% of their balance they'd have to take out. So their balance would be substantially lower as a result of this change. Is that what the government's advocating?
Well, what Scott Morrison has rightly pointed out, and it's based on work that his department has done, is that a lot of people, when they pass away, there's actually a lot of money left. And we don't want people's superannuation to actually be a form of a bequest. You get those tax concessions going in and have big lump sums that you leave to the next generation. So superannuation is designed to be a form of retirement income stream for people. So if they've got other assets, they should be drawing down on those, and that would actually save money for the taxpayer.
So, Scott Morrison, you mentioned him. He said this week, and I quote, "The government has no plans to make any changes to drawdown rates and rejects any suggestion this is being actively considered by the government."
He was talking about increasing the drawdown rates because the drawdown rates are at 4%.
Well, he said no plans to make any changes.
Well, the drawdown rates are at 4%. They increase as you become older. We have a retirement incomes review. What we're thinking about doing is looking at other new products to give people more flexibility. So say, for example, David, you're age 65. You got this big lump sum in your superannuation. You don't really know how much do you take out every year, how much do you spend. So you want some sort of certainty. So what I mentioned today in the speech is what about having a type of product where from 80 years of age onwards, you are guaranteed a source of income. Now, that's not really allowed under the current rules. So what we're thinking about is how do we encourage innovation where people can be guaranteed an income by taking out a certain product, taking out types of insurance, so that long into their life, with an ageing of the population, they have that sort of flexibility.
Final question on the citizenship argument that's going on about whether the immigration minister, should be able to strip the citizenship of terrorists. If it's a dual national, there seems to be broad agreement within the government on this. Today we've heard Malcolm Turnbull powerfully argue that the rule of law must apply, and going beyond that, there are already powers to remove their passport, deny them re-entry. What's your take on this, and what powers the minister should have?
Well, there are two different issues. There's, as you say, the rules that should apply to dual nationals, and what we are proposing is to go down the same path that you've seen in the United Kingdom, in New Zealand and elsewhere, where dual nationals who are involved in terrorist activities can have their citizenship stripped, and I strongly support that. There would be a form of judicial review to make sure that the power was applied lawfully by the immigration minister, and obviously we would not be making anyone stateless. On that second question, the more difficult one, which is if someone is only an Australian citizen, but they would have the option potentially of becoming a citizen of another country, well, we want to start the conversation with the Australian people.
What's your own view on that?
Look, I think that is challenging, but they have it in the UK, and they've applied the revoking of citizenship over 27 times there, nearly 30 times. So, I think these are issues
in the US, they can only do it when there's a conviction for terrorism.
And in Canada, they also have to go through a court procedure. I mean,
is that fair enough, though? Let the court decide whether they're a terrorist?
Well, sometimes you can't always allow. The court can't always get a conviction. That's the difficulty. Can I just put these statistics on the table? Afghanistan between 1990 and 2010, which was the global headquarters for terrorism. In fact, if you think about the Bali bombers, if you think about people on 9/11 and elsewhere, they all came back somehow to training in Afghanistan. 30 Australians went to fight, David, in Afghanistan. 25 of those came back to Australia. Of those 25, 19 recommitted some sort of terrorist activity or offence in Australia.
But the foreign minister can strip their passport at the moment.
And has done so in over 100 cases.
So why do we need further measures?
Well, passport, citizenship, they are different issues. But you're absolutely right. The foreign minister already has that power and is using that power.
So if you can stop them coming back in already, what more do you need?
Well, citizenship is more than a passport, and they can obviously reapply for their passport. Once you take the citizenship away, that's gone forever. And I think the key point here is, do we want to look into the eyes of the victims of an Australian family, of somebody who's come back from Syria and Iraq, where more than 30 Australians have already been killed in fighting, including a few who have been suicide bombers. They come back to Australia, they commit a terrorist attack here in Australia, and we ask the question, could have we done more? Should have we done more? I don't want to be in that position.
Josh Frydenberg, Assistant Treasurer, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.